Picture this, you are running. Not from something you can fight, but from a life you chose. A life of gilded cages, silken sheets that felt like shackles, and the hollow echo of a name that was never truly yours. The desert stretches before you, an unforgiving canvas of cracked earth and shimmering heat, and the sky is a vast, empty blue eye, watching without pity. Every step is a prayer, every ragged breath a rebellion. You've escaped the prison of wealth, but what if you've only traded it for a slower, harsher death under the sun? This is where we find Ilara. Her fine dress, once a symbol of status, is now torn and caked with the dust of her desperate flight. The jewels she'd sewn into the hem for currency feel like stones, dragging her down. Her throat was a desert in itself, and her vision blurred the horizon into a wavering line of despair. One step, then another. The world tilted, the blue eye of the sky swirling into a dark vortex, and she fell, her last conscious thought not of the man she was running from, but of the crushing loneliness of this vast, silent land. She awoke to the scent of wood smoke and brewing coffee, a smell so profoundly simple and comforting it felt like a dream. A rough but clean blanket was tucked around her, and the hard ground had been replaced by a soft mattress stuffed with straw. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim, warm light of a cabin. Every muscle ached, a testament to her ordeal. A figure sat in a chair by the hearth, his back to her, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound was rhythmic, calming. He was a large man, his shoulders broad under a worn cotton shirt, his presence filling the small space not with menace, but with a solid, rooted stillness. He seemed less a man and more a feature of the landscape, like an old, weathered stone. When he finally stopped, the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. He turned and she saw his face. It was a map of a hard life, carved with lines of sun and sorrow. A pale scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, pulling one side into a permanent, somber cast. But his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held no cruelty. They were watchful, deep, and tired. "You were half dead when I found you," he said, his voice a low rumble, like distant thunder. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "Drink this," he gestured to a tin cup of water on a small crate beside the bed. Ilara pushed herself up, her body protesting with a groan. She drank, the cool water a miracle on her parched throat. She expected him to ask who she was, where she came from, what trouble she was running from. He did none of those things. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. His name, she would learn, was Silas, and his cabin, nestled in a hidden canyon miles from any town, was his sanctuary from a world that had taken everything from him. He asked for nothing, and he offered the same. For days they existed in a shared silence. He would rise before the sun, tend to his few horses, and work the small patch of land he'd carved out of the wilderness. Ilara, weak at first, watched him from the doorway. She saw the gentleness in his large, calloused hands as he soothed a nervous mare. She saw the patience in the way he mended a fence, each movement precise and unhurried. He never spoke of his past, and the scar on his face was a silent testament to a story he kept locked away. Slowly, her strength returned. She began to help, not because he asked, but because the idleness felt more suffocating than the silence. She swept the cabin's plank floor, patched the worn elbows of his shirts with clumsy but determined stitches, and learned to cook over the open hearth. She discovered a small garden behind the cabin where he grew beans and squash, and she weeded it with a ferocity that surprised her. Here, her work had meaning. It sustained life. It was real. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, the crackling flames a conversation in themselves. He would carve small wooden animals, a hawk with outstretched wings, a resting deer, his focus absolute. She would read from one of the 2 books on his shelf, a worn copy of Shakespeare and a tattered book on agriculture. The words, spoken aloud, filled the space between them, weaving a fragile tapestry of connection. One night, a storm rolled in, the kind that shook the very bones of the canyon. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a grieving animal. The cabin, which had felt like a shelter, now seemed a tiny, fragile raft in a raging sea. The storm outside mirrored the one inside Alara. The safety she had found here felt temporary, an illusion that could be swept away at any moment. She looked at Silas, his face illuminated by the flickering firelight, the scar a stark, white line. She had to tell him. She couldn't live under his roof, eating his food, while harboring the secrets that had led her to his door. The lie of omission felt heavier than any jewel she'd carried. "My husband is dead," she began, her voice barely a whisper against the roar of the wind. Silas didn't look up from his carving, but his hands stilled. She took a shuddering breath and let the truth pour out, a torrent as wild as the storm. His name was Alistair Thornton. He was a wealthy man, very powerful. The second wealthy, powerful man I've married. She looked down at her hands, twisting the rough fabric of her borrowed dress. The first was a banker in the East. He was old and frail, and he left me a fortune. It was enough to be comfortable, but not enough to be safe. Not for a woman alone. Alistair offered me protection. His name, his influence. In return, I became another one of his possessions. A beautiful bird for his gilded cage. She finally dared to look at him. His stormy eyes were fixed on her now, his gaze intense, unwavering. "I've married men I didn't love, for money." The confession hung in the air, ugly and sharp. She expected disgust, judgment, perhaps even pity. She braced herself for the contempt she'd always held for herself. But the cowboy Silas, he just read her eyes. He saw past the confession to the desperate plea beneath it. He saw the hunted look of an animal that had been running its whole life. He saw the exhaustion of a soul that had bartered pieces of itself away just to survive. He set down his carving, a half-finished wolf, and leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. The firelight carved deep shadows into his face, making him look ancient and wise. And then he said, his voice soft but clear over the storm, "Money buys a roof. It buys a meal. Your eyes tell me you were looking for a home." He paused, his gaze never leaving hers, and in that moment, she felt seen for the first time in her life. Not as a wife, not as a widow, not as a prize, but as a person. "There's no shame in trying to survive a storm, Alara. The only shame is in thinking the storm is all there is." His words were a balm on a wound she didn't even know was still bleeding. He didn't absolve her, but he understood her. He saw the cage, not the bird. In the quiet warmth of that cabin, with the tempest raging outside, Alara finally felt the foundations of a true sanctuary. One built not of wood and stone, but of understanding. The weeks that followed were a gentle unfolding. The shared silence between them became comfortable, punctuated by easy conversation. He taught her how to read the clouds, how to track a deer, how to listen to the language of the canyon. She, in turn, brought a softness to his solitary life. She planted wildflowers in coffee tins and placed them on the windowsill. She coaxed a real smile from him once, a rare and beautiful thing that briefly erased the sorrow from his face, when she fell into the creek while trying to fish. He told her about his wife, Sarah, and their young son, taken by a fever years ago. His scar, he explained, was not from a fight with a man, but from a cougar he'd faced down when it threatened his livestock, a physical manifestation of his battle to protect the life he had built, a life that was later stolen by a force he couldn't fight. His grief was a quiet, constant companion, and Alara found that her own sorrows felt lighter when held beside his. They were two broken people, finding solace not in fixing each other, but in simply standing together in their brokenness. They were building a life, small and fragile, in the heart of the wilderness. But the past is a patient hunter. It does not forget. The first sign of trouble came on a supply run to the dusty outpost town of Redemption, a 2-day ride from the canyon. As Silas negotiated for flour and salt, he saw a poster tacked to the sheriff's office wall. It was a drawing of Alara. The likeness was crude but unmistakable. Below it, the words were a venomous lie. Wanted, Alara Thornton, for the theft of $50,000 in cash and jewels from the estate of her late husband, Alistair Thornton. A reward of $500 is offered for information leading to her capture. Signed, Marcus Thornton, mayor of Silver Creek. Silas's blood ran cold. This wasn't about money. $50,000 was nothing to a man like Thornton. This was about possession, about pride. Marcus, Alistair's younger brother, was a man known for his cruelty and his belief that everything and everyone had a price. He saw Ilara not as a person, but as an asset that had escaped his ledger. Silas tore the poster down when no one was looking, his jaw tight with a cold fury. He knew this was more than a piece of paper. It was a declaration of war. When he returned to the cabin, Ilara saw the change in him immediately. The quiet peace he normally carried had been replaced by a coiled tension, the stillness of a predator. He showed her the poster, and the color drained from her face. The hope that had begun to blossom in her heart withered under the chilling words. "He will never stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Marcus is not like Alistair. Alistair was content to own me. Marcus will want to break me." She looked around the small, warm cabin that had become her world. "I have to leave. I can't bring his darkness here. I won't let him destroy this." She moved to pack the few things she owned, but Silas's hand on her arm stopped her. His touch was firm, grounding. "No," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You said you were looking for a home." He looked her directly in the eye, his stormy gaze intense. "This is your home now, and I protect my home." It was a vow, a promise forged in the quiet understanding that had grown between them. For the first time, Ilara was not running. She was standing her ground, and she was not alone. They prepared. Silas cleaned his rifle, his movements economical and deadly. He checked the perimeter of the canyon, noting every approach, every point of vulnerability. He was no stranger to a fight, but the thought of that violence invading this peaceful place hardened his resolve. Ilara, meanwhile, found her own kind of strength. She stockpiled food and water, her hands moving with a purpose she'd never known. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now laced with a steely determination. She would not be a victim. She would not be a prize to be reclaimed. The waiting was the hardest part. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Then, one evening, as the sun bled across the western sky, painting the clouds in hues of orange and blood, they appeared. 3 riders at the mouth of the canyon. One sat taller in the saddle, a man in a fine black coat whose arrogance was visible even from a distance. Marcus Thornton had arrived. He did not ride in with guns blazing. His preferred weapon was intimidation, the crushing weight of his power. He and his 2 hired men rode slowly toward the cabin, their horses' hooves a funereal drumbeat against the dry earth. Silas stood on the porch, his rifle held loosely at his side. Ilara stood just inside the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her spine straight. Thornton dismounted, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He was a handsome man, but it was a cold, predatory beauty. His eyes, small and dark, scanned the cabin with disdain before landing on Silas. "You're harboring a thief," Thornton announced, his voice smooth and cultured, but with an underlying edge of steel. "That woman belongs to my family's estate. I have a legal claim to her and everything she stole." Silas remained motionless, his face an unreadable mask. "She stole nothing," he said, his low voice carrying in the still evening air. "And she is not a piece of property. She's a free woman." Thornton laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Freedom is a luxury for those who can afford it. She cannot. I have a warrant signed by the circuit judge. Give her to me and you can walk away from this. Resist, and you'll be an accessory to her crime." He held up a rolled parchment, the official seal glinting in the fading light. He was using the law as a cudgel, twisting it to serve his greed. "Your piece of paper means nothing here," Silas stated flatly. "This land has its own laws, and the first one is that we protect our own." From behind him, Ilara stepped out onto the porch to stand beside Silas. She met Marcus Thornton's gaze without flinching. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and strong, devoid of the fear he expected. "I am not yours, Marcus. I was never Alistair's. I will not go back to that cage." Thornton's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of rage. His authority had been challenged, his ownership denied. "You foolish woman," he spat. "Did you think this peasant could protect you from me? I own the law. I own the whole valley. I will have what is mine." He nodded to his men. "Take her." The two hired guns dismounted, their hands moving toward their holsters. The air grew thick with tension, the world shrinking to the space between the cabin and the three riders. The quiet canyon was about to be stained with violence. But just as the men took a step forward, another sound broke the silence. The steady, rhythmic clang of a hammer on an anvil. From a path leading down the canyon wall, a man appeared. He was huge, with arms like tree trunks and a soot-stained face. It was Jebediah, the town blacksmith, a man of few words and unshakable loyalty to Silas, who had once saved his daughter from a flash flood. He held a heavy smithing hammer in one hand as if it weighed nothing. Moments later, from another direction, came Martha, the general store owner, a stern-faced woman holding an old but well-kept shotgun. Her husband had died years ago, and Silas had made sure she was never cheated by traders and had enough firewood for the winters. Others began to appear, silent figures emerging from the rocks and trees. The trapper who lived upriver. The couple who ran the small way station. They were not an army. They were neighbors. Community. A family forged by shared hardship and quiet acts of kindness. They formed a loose, silent semicircle behind Silas and Alara, their presence a solid wall of defiance. Thornton stared, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. This was not how it was supposed to go. These were simple folk. They were supposed to cower before his wealth and power. But they stood there, armed with old hunting rifles, farm tools, and an unyielding resolve. They were protecting their own. "This is not your concern," Thornton snarled at them. Jebediah the blacksmith took a heavy step forward. "Silas is our concern," he rumbled, his voice deep and resonant. "And the woman is with him. That makes her our concern, too. You and your bought and paid for law ain't welcome in this canyon, Thornton. Best you ride on out before you find out how stubborn we can be." The two hired guns looked at Thornton, then at the determined faces surrounding them. They were paid to intimidate, not to fight a whole community that was defending its home. Their bravado evaporated. Thornton's face contorted with rage. He had been beaten, not by force of arms, but by something he could never understand. Loyalty. Community. He glared at Alara one last time, his eyes promising a future retribution that now felt hollow and distant. He mounted his horse, yanked the reins viciously, and rode away, his men scrambling to follow, swallowed by the twilight. As the sound of their hoofbeats faded, a profound silence settled over the canyon once more. But this was a different silence. It was filled with peace, with the strength of solidarity. Alara looked at the faces of the people who had stood for her, strangers who had risked their lives for her, and tears welled in her eyes. These were not tears of fear or sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude. She had run from a life of gilded cages and found herself in a fortress built of human kindness. She turned to Silas, who was watching her, the faintest hint of a true smile touching his lips and, for a moment, chasing away the shadows in his eyes. The storm had passed. The sun had set, but the promise of a new dawn felt real and certain. Here, in this small cabin, surrounded by this found family, she was finally truly home. So, let me ask you this. How many cages in this world are gilded with gold? How many prisons are built not with iron bars, but with expectations, with obligations, with the fear of starting over? Alara's story is a dramatic one, set in a time and place far from our own, but the heart of her struggle is timeless. It is the search for a place where you are seen not for what you have or who you belong to, but for who you are. It's about the courage it takes to run from a life that is suffocating you, even when you don't know where you're running to. And it's about the profound truth that sometimes the greatest treasures we can find are not jewels or fortunes, but the quiet understanding in another person's eyes and the steadfast loyalty of a found family. When does survival become a choice, and when is it a necessity? What does it truly mean to be free? If the story of redemption and finding home in the most unexpected of places resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. Your stories and your strength inspire us every day. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales that remind us of the unyielding power of the human spirit to break its own chains and build a new life.